Good morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Welcome to our first nerd series of the fall 2024 semester. As we are entering the nerd session, please um, tell us good morning, where you're from, where you're accessing us from today. And oh man, what did you miss from the center? What did you miss from the center? Answer those questions. And I'm so glad to see everybody. I have 150 people who registered for this lovely nerd session today. We'll give everybody a few minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Of course, with my introductions, and then we get to our featured nerd for this morning. Of course, Buffalo's in the house, Philadelphia, Rochester. Miss Barbara Ann is back from Philadelphia. Back for more enlightenment. Yes, ma'am. Laura's first time here. Good morning. Good morning. As you're entering the nerd session, please, in the chat, introduce yourselves and where you're coming from. And if you want to answer, hey, what did you miss most from the center? Please let us know. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Of course, for those who have been with us for years now, that we're very informal on this Saturday morning. So if there's some chat conversations in there, please indulge. Any questions you have throughout the sessions, please put them in the chat, and we have our people looking at them to make sure that Dr. Jackson gets all the questions you may have. Hey, good morning, Rachel. Nice to see you here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introductions. As people are, coming in, remind them in the chat just to introduce themselves and where they're coming from. We have over 150 that registered, so of course we'll probably have around 50 to 60 this morning. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first Black History Nerd session of the 2024-2025 school year. My name is LeGarrette King. I'm your HNIC, your head nerd in charge, and we're so happy to have everybody here today. For those who are new, Black History Nerds, we're just a bunch of nerds that wake up on Saturday mornings to learn about Black history, life, and culture. And so we welcome you as part of our Nerds family. For those who do not know, our Nerd Sessions are an informal space where those who would like to learn more about Black history, life, and culture can just come and engage in a very safe and radical space. So we welcome you all to We Refuse, a Forceful History of Black Resistance, facilitated by Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. Um, so, of course, in the nerd session falls under the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education, where we are housed at the University of Buffalo's Graduate School of Education. This is a space where PK-12 teachers can learn effective ways to teach Black history and race. We do this through several different mechanisms. We do this through our research projects, our professional development, our networking, our advocacy, and as well as our consulting projects that we take on throughout the year. The staff at the center are so energetic and they welcome you today. We have Dr. Christina King, who's one of our assistant directors, Dr. Brittany Jones, who is also an assistant director, and we have our wonderful graduate fellows who are always doing the best. Of course, you all know Donovan, right? We all know Daphne. We all know Abigail. Abigail's new to the center, but we know Abigail through all our nerd sessions. We have Dee, we have Montana, and everyone welcome Hannah Montgomery, who's now our program director, who will add tremendous value for our program administration. So this is the center. We have several different professional development aspects that we do throughout the semester for you all to put on your schedule. We have two other nerd sessions for the fall semester. Dr. Donovan Watts, who will be coming here on October 12th, Black Millennials, Slipping Allegiances, and the Democratic Party, getting ready for that election, okay? And then we also have Dr. Latasha Levy from Howard University, who will talk about the 60th anniversary of the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Project. So make sure you put those on your calendar. The registration forms, I believe, are up, or they'll be up very soon for people to register for those sessions. Remember, we have nerd sessions every second Saturday, every Saturday in February, but every second Saturday of the month for the academic school year. We also have book clubs, right? So today you're going to get a cheat sheet, right? You know, for our first book club that will start on next week. We Refuse, and what a beautiful cover, right? What a beautiful cover. I began reading it, and I'm telling you, we are going to really enjoy it. So if you are interested in having a more intimate experience with learning about, today's talk, then We Refuse, our book club, facilitated by Dee, will start next next Saturday through Zoom, 1:30 to 2:30. So make sure you're there. We're doing this from September 21st through the 19th. Our second book club for the fall semester is going to be Pro-Blackness and Early Childhood Education. Donovan will be facilitating this one. This will start on October 26th. So the registration for that should be online very soon. Also, our Researching Race series is starting on November 7th with Dr. Ashley Wilson from Albion College. So make sure you put that on your calendar. I believe that starts at 5:30 p.m. And lasts till 7 o'clock. Authors of School in Color is a racial literacy initiative through the center. This is where children's book authors visit local schools, and we'll have more information about that as we go through the semester and for further book clubs. And then we are so excited about our Teaching Black History micro-credential that we're starting next week. This is a one-year micro-credential that will provide you with further study on concepts of Black history, curriculum, Black history pedagogy, and just being an effective Black history teacher. The cost for this school year is $1,500, and several people on this call are already part of our first cohort for our Teaching Black History micro-credential. So we're so excited. Our instructors are Abigail Henry and Dee Forbes. Now, for the micro-credential, all the nerd series, or a few nerd series, and a few of our other professional development sessions are part of the curriculum. So if you are already infused within our professional development programs, and if you want to be a little bit more knowledgeable around Black history teaching, half of the program is just our events we already throw, right? And then we have two major classes, Teaching Black History 1 and Teaching Black History 2. So we're very excited to start that on next week. Abigail, you have anything you want to say about that, or are we good?
No, I'm just really excited, and I'm excited that there are some people here that are part of the micro-credential.
All right. And our granddaddy of them all is our Teaching Black History Conference, right? So July 25th through the 27th, 2025. Go ahead and put this on your calendar, people. Our theme this year is Black Boy Joy, Black Girl Magic, the history of Black childhoods. And we are so excited and can't wait for all the wonderful presentation proposals that we may get, as well as having you all back in Buffalo in July. All right, so go ahead and put that on your calendar. All right, so as we get to our speakers, I always provide a few resources for you all that will kind of connect with the topic at hand. These are my two favorite here. This Nonviolence Stuff Will Get You Killed by Charles Cobb. All right, if we could put a link to that book in the chat there, very enlightening reading here. And then Colored Travelers, Mobility in the Fight for Citizenship Before the Civil War by Elizabeth Pryor. Two really good books here that will kind of reshape your understanding of the concepts of resistance, particularly through Black history. And then, of course, people who are familiar with my Black history framework, we understand that agency, resistance, and justice is principle number two, the most effective ways to approach Black history in the classrooms. So we're so excited to have this presentation. Okay. All right, Daphne, you want to introduce our featured nerd for today?
Absolutely. So, Dr. Kellie Carter identifies herself as a historian, author, educator, as well as speaker. She is the Michael and Denise 68 Associate Professor of Africana Studies and the Chair of the Africana Studies Department, Wellesley College. She is the author of We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance, and the award-winning book Force and Freedom: Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence. Force and Freedom was a finalist for the Frederick Douglass Book Prize, a winner of the James H. Broussard Best First Book Prize, and a finalist for the Museum of African American History Stone Book Prize Award in 2019. The Washington Post listed Force and Freedom as one of 13 books to read on African American history. Her interview, A History of Violent Protest, on Slate's What's Next podcast, was listed as one of the best 2022 of the best of 2020. She has also given TEDx talks titled "Why Black Abolitionists Matter."
Someone has already asked will Dr. Jackson be at the next conference to get our copy of her book signed. I don't know if she's going to be in the thing, but we'll figure something out, Colin.
Send me an invite. I'll come. Send me an invite.
All
And
right.
there's one more.
Oh,
If it's so,
I'm
Dr.
sorry, Dad.
Jackson, would you like me to continue, or is it okay to stop there?
You can stop there. We can get. I always feel
Okay.
uncomfortable with the introduction.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We're all good. We can dive in. I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for joining on a Saturday morning. I know that weekends are precious, and so that anytime you choose to dedicate a weekend, the time that you have to learn and to engage in what I think is critical work, it just makes me feel really, really good and honored. I'm getting over a slight cold, so I'm going to try not to blow my nose or anything like that while I'm speaking. But yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I'm just gonna share for you some sort of snippets of my book. I have a PowerPoint presentation because I love good optics. We all love good optics. Let me pull this up and maximize it. Let's see. Okay, can you all see this? Okay, perfect. Um, First, I want to say I'm super excited the book came out. I have merch with the book, guys. I'm really hyped about that. I had a friend put this together for me. I'm stoked. This book has just been such a labor of love that I didn't anticipate writing. I do a lot of public speaking. I have two podcasts. I do a lot of documentaries. I do a lot of consultant work. And I feel like I have 10 jobs. I have, a husband and three kids. I am always busy. And this book kind of sprung upon me in ways that were unexpected. And so I want to talk about why I got to this book, how I got to it, and then what the book is really all about. The book also tells a lot of family stories. So I'm going to start with a family story, and we'll just get into it. So this is my great grandmother Arnesta. And when Arnesta was about 9 years old, she stepped on a rusty nail. Not long after, infection began to set in, and she likely contracted tetanus, which is a serious bacterial infection that causes painful muscle spasms and can lead to death if untreated. Her mother, Mary Bullard, was frantic. Ernesto was her only child, and she was going to lose her if she did not act fast. So Mary sent Ernesto to the only doctor she knew, a white man who lived in a big house on the other side of town. The white doctor offered to help, but in exchange, Ernesto would have to live with him for the rest of her life, working for his family. Growing up Black and a girl in 1915 left her vulnerable. In rural Alabama, during one of the worst periods of race relations in America, these were the detestable but predictable terms of engagement. Mary, panic-stricken and not wanting to lose her daughter to death, agreed. But thankfully, Ernesto's grandmother, a former slave whose name has been lost to history, intervened and refused the doctor's proposal. She picked up her ailing granddaughter and took her home. And there she administered every natural remedy at her disposal. Ernesto survived, but for the rest of her life, she walked with a limp. Whatever space she entered, whatever path she took, she was marked by a violent racial imprint. My mother told me this story as a child to explain my great-grandmother's limp, but it was not until I was an adult that I realized just how that rusty nail was not the root of her trauma. This story has always gripped me for several reasons. First, Ernesto was a child, her mother's only child. How could a doctor refuse a dying child medical care when it was in his ability to heal her? He had abandoned his oath. First, do no harm. Secondly, during 50 years out from slavery, white folks still felt entitled to Black labor and life in perpetuity. Clearly, everything was transactional to this white doctor. Built into the deal was a lifetime of servitude and likely physical and sexual abuse. White supremacy in America can be summed up by these two diabolical options: live a life in bondage or refuse and limp. To be Black in America is to live life with a limp. My great-grandmother's outcome had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with power. The power of the white doctor to neglect and attempt to exploit a little Black girl who came to him for help. But my book is not about the white doctor or the many people like him. In many ways, We Refuse is about my great-great-great-grandmother's response, her refusal. It is about her attempt to rescue my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, myself, and even my daughters. I realized that refusal is a forceful no. It is a no that is packed full of energy and meaning. We refuse is similar to Black colloquialisms such as nah, or nope, or not today, Satan, or my personal favorite, oh, hell no. I was recently asked about the difference between resistance and refusal. And for me, resistance is how one responds to white supremacy, but refusal is why. Refusal abhors oppression and insists on defining how humanity should be understood and treated with dignity, respect, and decency. Non-verbally, refusal is a halting hand or a pointing finger waving from side to side or a powerful raised fist. It is a barrier that prevents oppressed people from being consumed. And refusal can be enacted by an individual, but at its heart, refusal is collective, which is why the phrase or the sentiment behind the phrase, we refuse, persists among subjugated people and is a key refrain in Black feminist politics. Black women have refused to be invisible or small. And my entire book consists of examples of Black women refusing lies, violence, theft, mockery, or second-class citizenship. It shows how our refusal denies whiteness and white supremacy its power and unearned authority. Last summer, I took my first trip to Ghana, and I traveled to the Gold Coast to visit Almina. It's one of the largest slave dungeons built by the Portuguese. And on a wall, just adjacent to the cell where they kept rebellious slaves, who they left to die a slow death, is a plaque. And on it reads, "We are the children of those who refuse to die. We are the children of those who refuse to die." So yes, Black Americans are the descendants of African warriors and soldiers, but also of ordinary African commoners who refuse to be bound, broken, and dehumanized. And since the 16th century, Black history has become a history of refusal. From the first slave ships that left the coast of Africa for the New World, Black people refused to die. And some even forfeited their lives because they refused to live in the conditions created by their white captors. In the 17th century, Queen Anna Njinga of the Kingdom of Ndongo, which is present-day Angola, refused the terms and the broken treaties of the Portuguese, and fought for decades against the enslavement of her people. In the 18th century, Elizabeth Freeman, who upon hearing the Declaration of Independence read out loud, refused to be denied her right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. As an enslaved person living in Massachusetts, she took to the courts and sued for her freedom and won. In the 19th century, Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 was a collective refusal. During the uprising, enslaved people killed nearly 60 white men, women, and children. They killed their enslavers because they refused to be kept in bondage. They killed white children because they refused to let them perpetuate the system by growing up to become slaveholders. Enslaved people refused to be enslaved, even when their efforts to gain freedom failed. Black children refuse as well. During the 1950s and 60s, the American flag was used as a symbol for the civil rights movement. In a sea of Confederate flags throughout the South, the American flag reminded the nation that Black people were Americans. Here is 5-year-old Anthony protesting alongside his mother, Miss Aline Quinn of Macomb, Mississippi, for her right to vote. Turned away from seeing the governor, an officer attempted to snatch Anthony's flag from his hand. His mother called to him, "Anthony, don't let that man take your flag. Anthony, don't let that man take your flag." These are the stories of Black women and men and children who refused white supremacy. We Refuse offers a fundamental shift in how we understand and talk about Black women's responses to white supremacy. I think often Black women are up against when Black women are up against white violence, society presents them with two options. Are you going to be violent or are you going to be nonviolent? We see this a lot when it comes to people like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King. We think of people either throwing a Molotov cocktail and burning it all down or getting on their knees and praying for forgiveness. But are you going to burn it all down or are you going to forgive? Violence or nonviolence, these being the choices, is something that is too limiting for my taste. Nonviolence is a principle that is based on the idea that one can morally persuade their oppressor to have a pang of conscience or conviction regarding their wrongness. Nonviolence uses compassion and empathy and morality to compel another's humanity. But I take issue with how the binary of nonviolence and violence has controlled the praxis and narrative by which the oppressed combat their oppression. Nonviolence on its own is not at all expansive enough to rectify the harm that has been caused by racism. And while Ernesto's remedy might fall under the category of nonviolence, since no one was physically harmed by the doctor for making his proposal, my ancestors' refusal was complex, and it is too reductive to throw it in a pile labeled nonviolence. Furthermore, promoting and celebrating nonviolence as the only acceptable form of resistance is rife with handicaps. My ancestors' refusal was fundamental to her granddaughter's survival. First, she refused the doctor's offer. Then, she sought every natural remedy she possessed to stop the infection and heal Ernesto's body. She did not plead or bargain with the doctor. She did not try to convince him that Ernesto was a child or human. Her refusal, her remedy and protection transcended violence or nonviolence. She took the doctor out of the equation. The doctor had no compassion for the child. He could not be morally persuaded. Violence against him would have been a death sentence, but nonviolence against him would have also ensured my great-grandmother's death. White supremacy and anti-Blackness are always violent, and the constant refrain is for the harm to forgive violence, forget injury, forfeit their agency. Friends, we have more than two options. Black people need not choose between a certain death or a life in bondage. We have throughout history approached such violence with an array of responses. And I think, when I look at this picture of MLK and even other pictures of him, I think for too long, MLK has been the model of how we do nonviolence. But King's beliefs have been diluted at best or perverted at worst. American society presents nonviolence that often speaks nothing of white supremacy, capitalism, or militarism. And I often think that King's beliefs were not wrong, but merely incomplete. They do not always encompass the full range of human responses that people engage in, particularly in the face of death. King's 6 principles of nonviolence do not address action steps for the oppressors, only the oppressed. They do not address reparations, which may not be purely monetarily, or how to repair the harm of white supremacy. How do people heal? Not after breaking a bone or stepping on a rusty nail, but after losing a loved one, land, wealth, health, and after psychological trauma. And in a spiritual and secular sense, King's principles do not address repentance. What does it look like to turn from the ways of the oppressor? What does it look like to relinquish power? These missing principles are what activists today are still trying to navigate. Not how we employ harm for transformation, but how we mitigate harm altogether. Today, nonviolence has dwindled down to marches. And when a Black woman, man, or child is killed by the police, people march. But marches do not keep people alive. Marches honor the dead. Marches are public mourning, not public policy. And whenever racial altercations gain traction in the media, pundits and politicians alike are quick to point to King as the model for doing protests the right way. After racial violence results in death, the media's question is, will the protest be peaceful? Or even a more egregious question, does the victim's family forgive the perpetrator? Marches, forgiveness, and peaceful protests are all shorthand for callbacks to King. But nonviolence today means something different than what King intended. Now it is a performance of passive power that almost ensures that those in power never structurally change. Moreover, white supremacy does not believe in nonviolence because it does not believe in Black humanity. To white supremacy, nonviolence is a scarecrow, and racists rest like crows on its outstretched arms. Nonviolence alone could never sufficiently frighten or endanger political, economic, or social institutions. For me, I see violence as more than just the engine of white supremacy. Violence is an entire ecosystem. Violence is a tool employed to harm, deny, restrict, neglect, separate, and deceive. Notably, notably, it can be a means to various ends. It can be used to enforce white supremacy or to overthrow a government. Violence is slavery and segregation. Violence is theft and hoarding. Violence is replacing the truth with conspiracy. Violence is rupture and separation. Violence occupies the space of a system, an ideology, a culture, and a language. And violence can take many forms. And Black people spend much of their lives, if not their entire lives, combating, addressing, avoiding, and subverting white violence. Toni Morrison's famous 1975 Portland, Oregon State University speech said, racism is a distraction because it keeps you from doing your work. Literary critic Sandy Alexander argued in 2020 that racism is so distracting, it deprioritized a whole global pandemic. She said racism is so bold, so flagrantly murderous, that it has absolutely no qualms about being caught on camera. In fact, it will pose for it. So We Refuse focuses on Black women's responses to white supremacy and reframes the conversation away from the rightness or wrongness or nonviolence and instead focuses on what works. And I focus on Black women because I am in agreement with the Combahee River Collective, which says if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression. So We Refuse examines the 5 ways that Black women have successfully engaged white supremacy beyond nonviolence. So for the book, I look at these 5 categories, and these 5 categories are not at all exhaustive. There are 5 remedies that I came up with: revolution, protection, force, flight, and joy. But for me, I use these categories because I saw all of the different ways that they had not only worked in my life, but I saw the ways that they had been sort of a blueprint from the past. So when I look at things like revolution, for example, the first chapter looks at the age of revolutions and really looks at the efforts of the Haitian Revolution. I see revolution as replacing a broken system with a better one. I look at protection and I understand protection is best understood as the efforts of the abolitionist movement and on the Underground Railroad, Black people who protected family, friends, and fugitives from the violence of slavery and the snare of slave catchers. I look at force. I look at how Black people employed their Second Amendment rights to protect themselves from violence and the Klan. I look at flight. I look at Black people who left, maybe temporarily or maybe forever, but always in search of belonging. And lastly, I look at the potency of joy. I contend that the opposite of violence is not nonviolence. In America, the opposite of violence is the fullness of Black humanity bound together with joy. And I love this picture so much because it just feels like, hey, it was like a moment, like I want to be in the circle. Um, my great 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 grandmother refused the metaphorical fork in the road. She stomped out a new trail for our Nesta. She rejected dehumanization. Understanding a different path forward means asking different questions and being willing to accept hard solutions. So let's start with asking different questions. Rarely, if ever, are activists asked about the violence of whiteness. The public is more consumed with how Black folks will find liberation only as it relates to nonviolence. Shifting these conversations is imperative. Scholar and activist Angela Davis was asked a similar question by a reporter regarding the use of violence. In 1972, during her incarceration, Davis was filmed for an interview that has since become iconic, not just because of her afro and her outfit, but what she says in this interview. The journalist asks her, he says, how do you get there? He's talking about how do you get to freedom? How do you get there? You get there with confrontation, violence? Angela Davis scoffed. Is that the question you're asking? Then she relayed a litany of violent attacks against Black people, from police brutality to the killing of 4 little girls with the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. The little girls were friends of Angela Davis and students of her mother. When someone asks me about violence, I just find it incredible, she says. We will not question choices so much as examine the intended outcome of those choices. If the goal is safety, then the public should not ask why the oppressed use force, but whether force helped keep them safe. If the goal is citizenship, it is less important whether Black people drove or flew to another place, and more important that they arrived at a place where they could belong. So with the time I have left, and I'm checking time because I want to leave, time for Q&A, I want to tell two stories that sort of encapsulate, like revolution, production force, flight joy. But because we don't have a whole lot of time, I want to I'll tell two stories, one that's about force and one that's about joy. So I'm going to start by telling the story about force, and this is the story of a 17-year-old girl named Carrie Johnson, whose bravery compelled her to fight off an angry mob and defend herself. It was 1919. Black soldiers had returned from war to a red summer. And if you don't know about red summer was the summer during 1919 where racial riots were breaking out all over the country. Black soldiers are returning from World War I, and they're being lynched, and their communities are being destroyed. This is where W.E.B. Du Bois writes, we return from fighting, we return fighting. So it's during the middle of July, and the nation's capital explodes with racial violence. White men began to terrorize Black communities, and for 5 days, the city was in chaos regarding the rumored arrest of a Black man accused of raping a white woman. Armed white mobs gathered in Black communities and shot into their windows, pelted rocks at their homes, and pulled Black folk off streetcars to beat them. During the fourth straight night of rioting, a 17-year-old Carrie and her father, Benjamin Johnson, were in their home when the mob came to their neighborhood. Their home was a modest 2-story brick house. Their immediate neighborhood was Black, but the surrounding neighborhood was surrounded by white neighborhoods, and the white residents greatly outnumbered the Black ones. Around 1,000 white people stormed the streets headed toward Black homes such as the Johnsons. Armed with pistols and rifles, the Black community was doing all it could to keep the mob at bay. Sitting in her window overlooking New York Avenue, Carrie took pot shots at the white mob prowling the streets below. She clearly knew how to use a gun and understood the advantage of being higher up. She could see everyone below as well as from a distance. And she also had good aim, shooting and hitting one of the white men storming her block. Though police officers were present, no police officer was interested in stopping the white mobs from destroying Black property and harming Black people. In fact, 2 police officers were notified of a person taking shots from a window and pointed at Carrie's home. At this point, Carrie and her father were hiding inside the house under a bed on the second floor. 2 white police officers broke down the front door of the Johnson residence and did not identify themselves. The house was quiet and dark. The officers crept up the staircase with their guns ready. They made it to the second floor and pushed their way into a dark bedroom. As the officers opened the door, shots rang out. Carrie started shooting from under the bed. Bewildered, the officers shot at the walls, but Carrie was relentless. She took several shots and hit Officer Harry Wilson twice. He fell to the floor. A bullet struck Carrie in her thigh. Another struck her father, Benjamin, in the shoulder. But they were alive. Officer Wilson was not. When the gunfire finally ceased, other officers dragged Carrie and her father from under the bed and marched them to the street in handcuffs. The authorities were baffled that a teenage girl had committed such an act of forceful armed defense. As people stood around wondering what might happen next, suddenly it began to rain and then pour. The torrential rain broke the mob's will to continue. So I say you're gonna be mad at me, but you gotta read the book to find out what happens to Carrie. It's wild, it's crazy what happens to her. But I do want to share not just the outcome, I do want to share how people responded to what happens because I find that equally fascinating. And that is the fact that Black people stand for this teenage girl, that they rallied around her. Everyone knew what she was up against, and immediately funds were raised for Carrie's legal defense. One Southern Black woman wrote a letter to the NAACP magazine, The Crisis. She praised Black people for fighting back. As she read about the Washington riot, the woman said she wept tears of gladness and madness. Those who knew about Carrie turned her into a folk hero in the Black press. Perhaps the most poignant was a poem written by an 11-year-old Black girl named Martina Sims. Martina, and this is a picture of the officer that Carrie Johnson killed, um, Harry Wilson. This is a picture of the poem that is written by Martina Sims. And again, this girl is 11 years old. And one of the lines in the poem singles out Carrie. It says, "You read about Johnson, who was only 17. She killed a detective. Wasn't she brave and keen?" Carrie was celebrated. People wrote to Black newspapers to find out how they could support her. Ella Rice, treasurer of the New Jersey Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, wrote a letter to the president of the NAACP in hopes of getting aid for Carrie. Rice noted that Black women held Carrie in high regard and considered the harsh punishment she might face. People understood that Carrie was a young girl caught up in a horrible situation. They had compassion for her. And during an era of respectability politics in the community, it would have been easy to disown Carrie. But at every turn, the Black community showed empathy for her circumstances and admiration for her actions. When the Washington riot ended, it was an anomaly during Red Summer. More white people were killed than Black people. In total, 15 people died. 10 of them were white people. 2 of them were police officers, and 1 of them was killed by Carrie. So I marvel at this story. I marvel at the courage of a teenage Black girl who is committed to protecting her father, her home, herself, her community. She resisted and she refused the violence of white supremacy. And I think this story really talks about how protection and force can be a tool to instill pride and even victorious joy. And so, speaking about joy, I'm going to tell my last story about joy because I just think joy is so important. Joy for me is a weapon. I think that while whiteness. Oh, let me go forward. I'm going to skip for time purposes. I'm going to skip some of these slides. I think for the purposes of understanding Blackness, whiteness cannot be separated from violence, but Blackness can be separated from oppression. And the most powerful tool the Black Panther Party employed was actually not guns, but Black pride. And that Black pride invoked hope and happiness, which could shield one from the demoralizing and degenerative effects of racism. Writer and mother Ashley Simple wrote, "Some of us fight racism by raising our Black children to know joy. This matters too." I think joy is understood within a spiritual context, but it works oftentimes in tandem with suffering. Joy supersedes the material accumulation and the fleeting feeling of happiness. Joy destroys the emotional, physical, and intellectual and spiritual onslaught of whiteness as aspirational. To be clear, joy is not oblivious to Black suffering. On the contrary, suffering informs joy and even fortifies it. The deep well of humanity that Black people must draw upon is not pure optimism. Joy is rooted in radical love and hope and the complete confidence in the capacity of Black people. It is the ultimate expression of humanity. Again, Toni Morrison, I quote her a lot because I love Toni Morrison. She once said, "Finally, in the long trek through 300 years of Black life, there was joy," which is what I mostly remember. The part of our lives that was neither spent on our knees nor hanging from trees. I believe that the bulk of Black life is made from joy. And joy is not the denial of pain, trauma, or death, but the hope that comes from activism, resistance, and refusal. Joy is a haven. And there are always ways in which our people have carved out maroon societies to experience joy that cannot be stolen. I talk about a lot how joy comes from this spiritual context. When I was growing up, I grew up in the Baptist church, and there was this song by the Georgia Mass Choir. Maybe you know it was like joy, joy, God's great joy. And I can't sing, especially with the cold, but but it was this song with like sweet, beautiful, soul-saving joy. And it was such like a mantra, especially when you think in terms of the scripture and you think of like weeping may tarry for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Late in the midnight hour, joy is there. Like joy becomes this exhortation. And so I want to tell a story, but before I get to the story, I'm going to share this quote. This is by Imani Perry. She wrote this article, this op-ed for The Atlantic in 2020, and it was so powerful, encapsulates a lot of the ways that I feel about joy. She says, and Blackness. She says, "Racism is terrible. Blackness is not." She says the masters were wrong in the antebellum South when they described the body-shaking, delighted chuckle of an enslaved person as simple-mindedness. No, that laugh, like our music, like our language, like our movement, was a testimony that refused the terms of our degradation. In the footage of the protest in 2020, we've seen Black people dancing, chanting, singing. Do not misunderstand. This is not the absence of grief or rage or distraction. It is insistence. It is insistence. And I absolutely love that. So this final story, and I promise I'll wrap up quickly, is a story that comes from Stephanie Camp's work. She has this beautiful book I use all the time in my classroom called Closer to Freedom. And it's the story of a woman named Nancy Williams. Now, I don't have a picture for Nancy Williams, but you'll see why this picture makes sense in a minute. So Nancy Williams was a young adult when freedom finally came for her at the end of the Civil War. While she was enslaved as a teenager, she would slip away from her Virginia plantation in the middle of the night and travel a few miles into the woods away from prying eyes. There, in the heart of the forest, she gathered with other enslaved people to dance and drink the night away. And what I love about this picture is actually in the low country of South Carolina, but you can kind of see it's daytime, but this image would take place at night. And you can see where the plantations and sort of the big houses are sort of off in the distance with the image. And you have Black people with the banjo, which is a uniquely African-American instrument. You have what looks like a bottle of alcohol in between the man's legs. And there are these dancing competitions and people are mingling. And there's one Black man in the corner. He's got his arm around another woman. She's talking. They're talking. This is all like Black joy free from white gaze. That's what's really important. No one is watching them. And I often think about that a lot, like how Black people engage with each other when there is no white gaze. Um, so there in the heart of the forest, she gathered with other enslaved people to dance and drink the night away. In African American vernacular, Nancy recalled, "Them dances was something." These dance parties were also illicit and illegal during slavery. No enslaved person could be off the plantation without permission, and of course, permission to party would have never been granted. Thus, enslaved people had to carefully plan their soirées and hold them deep in the woods in the middle of the night. Some enslaved people brought musical instruments such as banjos, fiddles, and tambourines. Undoubtedly, there were makeshift drums, and just like that, it was a party. Men and women strutted and hooped and hollered with laughter. And Nancy could dance. She showed off her skills by balancing a glass of water on top of her head and dancing without spilling a drop. 3 boys bet on her. She reminisced fondly with humor. Out there in the middle, just dancing, just me and Ginny and the devil. Nancy had gone to great length to prepare her outfit for the evening. She had dyed her dress yellow and added ruffles. She even made matching yellow shoes. They were ill-fitted and hurt her feet, but Nancy didn't care. She was beautiful and adorned by her own handiwork. Even with painful shoes, Nancy admitted, "That ain't stopped me from dancing." The joy of dancing and being cute superseded her desire to be comfortable or even practical. When Nancy was asked how she managed to get materials for her yellow dress and matching yellow shoes, she chuckled, "How I get them? I stole them." She stole all she needed to make her outfit. From additional cloth to the paint she used to color her shoes, she was not ashamed. In fact, she was nearly eager to tell her interviewer about her ingenuity. Nancy's joy was about the reclamation of her time, labor, and beauty. Adornment is a form of declaring pride in oneself, and Nancy wanted to feel attractive and beautiful. Even her color of choice of yellow was bold. She did not she wanted to be seen, to be the center of attention, to be the sun personified. Yellow is joy and light. She moved as far away as possible from the muted brown rags of slavery. And on that night, she was vibrant and seen, glowing from head to toe in spectacular, warm, joyful yellow, dancing until her feet hurt. And so there's so much that I love about this story. I love that how even during slavery, Black people prioritized their own enjoyment, regardless of the consequences, knowing what it might cost them. They still persisted and refused to be denied their humanity. There's a great quote too that I love by Professor Tara Bynum. She discusses how scholars in general and the general public don't talk often enough about what feels good to Black people when there is no white gaze, when there is no one around to sort of critique or judge or punish or police their movements and their joy. Um, so I want to encourage you as I close. I think that, if you're like me, you might be thinking about the state of the world, the state of politics, our climate, the healthcare system, the state of our prisons, our educational system. And if you're like me, you might be angry, and you should be. Anger is useful. Audre Lorde argued that anger prevents you from being stagnant and resigned. Anger is an engine of refusal, but our anger should never be left alone. It must be tethered to hope, and hope is tethered to joy. Hope and joy stem from a place of purpose and promise. So I have a couple more slides, but I want to leave time for discussion. So I'm going to stop right there and leave you with joy. This is pictures of my family. These are my 3 kids and my husband. And I think of like what makes us happy. It's reading books, it's smelling flowers, it's hugs and kisses, it's popsicles, like it's just joy. And, people will ask me like, well, what does this image have to do with white supremacy? And my answer is always the same: nothing. And that's the point. That is the point. The point is I strive to make the bulk of my life absent from white supremacy. So I'll stop right there.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give her a hand for that wonderful presentation. Hands either in the video or in the chat there. of course, and she left the little nuggets for us to dive into the book and everything like that. So of course, remember next week we start the book. We start the book for our book club and everything like that. So I want to stop, and this is the time where we leave it up to the audience here and see if you have any questions or concerns. I'll put it on gallery. You can just unmute yourself or raise your hand, and we'll get with you. Daphne Abigail, please check in the chat to see if there's any questions in there as well. So we'll go ahead and open it up.
I'm grateful for this being on Joy. This is the mouth again. But I am so glad that this was mentioned, because sometimes we are viewed as being a little off when we have joy in the midst of all of this suffering. And we should not let that deter us from the inbred joy that's in us in spite of the chaos around us. I will mute myself.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you. Yeah, it's so important to me. I realize that, like, we can't just exist in anger, right? That's not sustainable. And we can't just exist in joy, because that's not realistic. We can't turn our back and tune it all out either. We need a healthy balance of anger and joy and refusal. We need it all. We need it all.
Yeah, when I was reading the first half of the book, right? This is a book for humanity, Black humanity, and we try to help teachers who teach Black history in K-12 spaces kind of understand that there's several different principles that need to be explored through your curriculum, and one of it is of course resistance, but the other one is about just Black emotionality, because we miss the humanity of Black folk, right?
Yeah.
Where we're dehumanized within the curriculum, we're dehumanized with our actions, we're dehumanized in all these various different functions, and which leads to or which was developed by the anti-Blackness that's been just pervading our society. Yeah, the Black emotion aspect, the anger, the joy, even being scared, right, are all part of our history and all part of our humanity that's connected. Go ahead, Todd.
I was going to say that we just had a meeting for Boston University and our African teachers program, and talking about how to get rid of like stereotypes and things like that. And the first thing I thought of is here is like, if I ask my students, I teach the new AP African class, and I said, if you think of maybe stereotypes of African American history, what would you get? You would get slavery, you would get things like that. But joy would not be probably one of those things that would show up on that list. And I love that. I love looking for exceptions, whether it's Africa, it's more, Africa's more than just animals, or things like that. And same thing with joy. That's what the first thing I thought of on how to use that in a classroom.
Yeah, thank you for that. I use that example of Nancy, because I think that this is tricky to say, so I want to say it carefully, but like, think that because Black people were enslaved, that they were never happy, that they never found joy, that they never laughed, that they never had love. And that's just not true. Now, I'm not trying to say that, so see, slavery wasn't that bad. They laughed, they danced. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they had to fight to carve out ways to insist their humanity. And it was not a way of negating the system of slavery that they were in, but it was a way of saying, like, no matter what, Black people will find a way to make life survivable. And that to me is really important. And even in an African context, I do the same thing as well. I'm teaching a course now, and I want my students to know, like, the continent is not just AIDS and plunder and, war and things of that nature. Let's spend time talking about Black literature, talking about Afro beats, talking about African cuisine, talking about things that are like the genius of the continent. And we spend a lot of time doing that, and students get so much out of it because they don't want to be depressed. You know what I mean? They don't want to have this very deficit model outlook. And so they appreciate it. And I appreciate teaching it because I don't want to just be doom and gloom either.
Ms. Fields?
That is very important point to remember. In spite of where things are today, we have to continue to have our festivals and our parties and our times we get together and laugh and enjoy one another. We need not forget where our joy comes from, within, not without.
Yeah.
And once we forget about our joy, we are already defeated.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree. 100%.
I'll mute.
100%. Yeah.
Mr. Andrews?
I really have to say thank you so much for a lot of what you shared. And I really want to say also, just in that context of when we're talking about the Black experience, but then also thinking about our joy, is I can say for myself, when looking at our lineage and how we have continued to celebrate joy even in our suffrage, just even through history, one of the biggest things that, when we look at it, a lot of our spirituals that were carried on, that's how we found our joy. A lot of the things that our ingenuity, of how, we were braiding our roots, our travel routes from the Underground Railroad. Those were ways that we found joy in our suffrage. And that is one of the things that I say that I find great joy in the fact of, even when I may have hardship, even when I may have difficulty, I can go back and use that as a reference point of, hey, this is how my ancestors found joy, even when they were going through things that were, even more difficult than am going through. And celebrating, who I am, celebrating the love that I'm seeing, and that I can find in those things. And so I really just appreciate that you took it back to, this is what I want to focus on, is that joy. And that's how we can highlight that and celebrate that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's the last chapter of the book, y'all. The last chapter of the book is joy. And it's a good way to end a book. It's a good way to end a book that's kind of can be a hard read, I think. So yeah.
Mr. Herring?
Thank you so much. That was a really beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed it. One thing I was wondering is, over the last year, it just seems like every time I pick up the newspaper, especially just given some of the Supreme Court rulings going back, to last summer, you just see the, things like, I'm reading a week ago about white students at Wisconsin-Madison filing lawsuits, these frivolous lawsuits, saying that their dignity is being challenged or compromised because they can't, apply for a minority scholarship, that's been around for 30 years. And, those Supreme Court rulings have just opened the floodgates, so to speak, to a lot of this just ridiculous. In my view, it's just kind of like going backward, like all these great initiatives that have been around to really even the playing field. And I was just thinking, what is the sort of we refuse look like in terms of a lot of these, anti-DEI, just trying to use very systemic ways to continue marginalizing, people of color. I was wondering what your thoughts were
That's a
there.
good question. That's a good question. I I tell my students the Supreme Court has always been conservative. Always been conservative. There has never really been a liberal court, so to speak. Even when you get progressive court cases, it's more an anomaly than it is the status quo. And that's not great, but it's not great at all. But at the same time, that has never deterred people from moving to change the law, from refusing. I mean, you're seeing it now with Roe v. Wade, where people are like, you know what? This might be the Supreme Court, but we about to vote this November, and we're about to vote on this ballot initiative, and we're about to, mobilize. I think you will always find people that will mobilize, that will refuse. I'll say, in my classroom, this is what we're reading. In my classroom, this is what we're doing, and telling the students why it matters, and this is not just refusal for refusal's sake, but what is at stake. I think students need to really know what is at stake and what they are fighting for. And so refusal takes on a lot of different forms, but I think, we can't get comfortable, or we certainly can't be complicit. We have to constantly keep refusing and resisting. And that's going to look like a lot of different things for different people. I refuse a lot in my classroom. I refuse with the way I construct my syllabus, I refuse with the way that I interact with, people around me, and the way I try to participate in organizations that I know are doing progressive work. So that's the beauty of power, is that it's not really top down. It's actually bottom up. That a lot of the changes we live our lives in are from what comes from the ground and forces the hand of the powers that be. It's not always just like top down change.
Thank you. I look
Mhm.
forward to reading your book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Colin?
Dr. Jackson, it is an honor to meet you. So I'm like a small little postdoc, so hopefully all this makes sense. I apologize if not. So so I've used your work to like inform my work. So at the population level, I research the education and health of Black people over the life course. And right now I'm specifically looking at how um, educational policy has shaped and influenced the late life cognition of older Black adults. Um, and because of your work and people like your work, I've taken a step back to think it's kind of a deficit-based approach that historically, like, white institutions and white laws are responsible for the cognition and well-being solely of the Black community. Um, and so I started to think back to my education, PhD work, and like mentors like Garrett, and um right now I'm trying to shift the narrative, like in looking at the population level, which is kind of hard, on Black autonomy, Black excellence, and like in your case, like Black joy, and how that has influenced the late life health of Black adults.
Mm.
Um, so my question for you is, um, for you and scholars like are in your space, what kinds of experiences and variables on the front end in educational, what I call freedom spaces,
Mm-hmm.
would you like to see um, that influence late life health and cognition
Mm.
of the Black community? Because I try and get people smarter than me and historians
Mm-hmm.
and like curriculum scholars to influence my public health science.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the public health is a very whitewashed
Mm-hmm.
discipline.
Yeah.
And so um what types of experiences like Black kids and Black college students would you like to see in terms of Black excellence, Black autonomy, and Black joy
Mm.
as predictive variables of late life cognition?
You know, I I don't So for me, it was going to HBCU. I went to Howard University, the number one HBCU in the country, but I went to all white schools growing up. It was just me and my siblings. We were the only Black kids in the school. There might have been one other kid, and that was it. And because I had such a white perspective, my parents were emphatic about sending us to HBCUs. And so when I went to Howard, it was the first time I saw a lot of other Black people like me, basically. And it transformative doesn't even begin to describe, I've seen in the chat. Transformative doesn't even begin to describe how Howard changed my life, my outlook, the idea that of Black excellence as this collective, movement. Um, it was everything for me. The things that fortified me the most were Black school, HBCUs, my church, my faith was a big part of that. Social organizations like your sororities, your fraternities, your Jack and Jills, your links, things of that nature, things that in the community that were big, your sort of mommy groups. Those are the things that really fortified me, and gave me sort of like enough of a reprieve that I could go back out in the world and do what I needed to do. But those things were huge. I think we can't discount. I think the fact that we look at Kamala now and everyone's talking about how she's, an AKA. I'm not Greek, but that community, that sisterhood is fortification in ways that I cannot calculate for people who don't, understand it. But yeah, it's everything. But I don't know how to write about it. I just know that those are the things that have been, important for me. And I could, you could ask a ton of Black people and they could give you a ton of different, answers to that question. But I think it's good to focus, to move as much away from a deficit model as possible. And instead of saying like, what's so dysfunctional, starting to, what works? What's been effective? What's been good? Because that's what I do with nonviolence. It's like we talk about nonviolence, but did any of us get the change that we wanted in 2020? I don't think so. So why don't we talk about what's effective and not just what we think we should see?
All right. Last
Thank you, Doctor.
question. Oh, last question, Christina.
Oh, I hate that I'm the last, but
Oh,
but
good.
again, Dr. Jackson, thank you so much for it. Is everything that you've shared today has been so uh, inspirational and informational. And I drew a model, and so I hate that I can't share, but I'm going to do my best to try to kind of share about what it is, but my takeaway. So it's not a question, but it's actually just a compliment, not a comment, but a compliment. Um, from your talk today, I learned that refusal could manifest itself in both nonviolent and violent ways. And myself personally, I see my work sort of living within this feminist framework, if you may, wherein I I myself in, engage in or work to engage in writing and sharing stories and responding to stories from our ancestors, especially our maternal ancestors. Thank you so much for sharing your grandmother's and great grandmother's stories. And all of this being done in the absence of the white gaze from Toni Morrison. I shared in the chat, I don't know if you all saw that, but Toni Morrison talks about the importance of writing without the white gaze.
Yeah.
And I feel that your work, it just illuminated that. It's like that's the refusal, right? That's where we exist. That's where we create these joy. We share about the joy and all of that. That's our refusal. It's just a way that it manifests itself is within the joy.
I
So
love that. I
all
love
that
that.
connection. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, you guys are making me feel great. I really appreciate that. I do think I have tried to write. I hope when you read the book that you will feel like even the tone of my writing is a form of refusal. I try to write very forcefully. Sometimes I'm a little snarky, but like I think I'm writing with passion and I'm writing as a love letter for the Black community and people who love the Black community. Like that's what this book is about. And so I'm grateful to spend time with you. I saw in the chat there's who is the woman on the cover of the book. This is actually a painting by an artist who's Brooklyn based. His name is Taha Clayton, and it's called Soldier of Love. It's a beautiful painting. It's huge. The original is like 7 feet tall. And my wonderful editor chose it as the cover for my book, and I could not be more grateful. And No, it's not Carrie Johnson, but it could be. It could be. I feel like I know this woman. I was like, this woman, this is my auntie right here. Like, it's such a beautiful cover and such an ode to Black women and their protectiveness. So thank you so much, guys. This was great.
All right, so one more hand for Dr. Jackson for taking up her time on a
Yeah, I've got
Saturday morning, and
I've
the
got to say
beautiful
thank you. I'm
kids,
so
and
grateful.
yeah, beautiful kids, and probably her stoic husband and everything like that, waiting on her to come back here. Plug your merch again.
Oh yeah. I'll put that in the in the chat. It's just my website. So www.kelly, let's see, Kellie Carter, can't spell my last name, Jackson.
I said,
Oh yeah, somebody put it in there. Oh,
okay, I'll
thanks.
put it in there. All
You
right.
type faster than I do.
So make sure
Yeah,
we
if you like the Reaver Fuse, it's on there. If you want the woman with the gun, it's on there too. There's all the kinds of fun stuff.
so let's support her, purchase her book and her merch, and we really appreciate you, being our featured nerd this morning, and again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone. Enjoy good weather.
All right, good people.
Bye. Keep refusing.
All right, good people. We'll stop the recording. LSU about to come on, so I'm definitely